Well, thank you all for being here and for taking time out of your schedule to not only be here today, but also to be a part of the ISULeads program. That program is near and dear to me. I came here in 2011 as a Vice President for Student Affairs, and I worked with some folks in the Dean of Students office at the time to get this program off the ground. So I have a real personal affinity for the group. And ironically, I was just sharing with Laura, I haven't heard from this person in a while, but I was a mentor to a couple of students in the first year that this got off the ground. And one of them is a person who ended up becoming a student trustee, and he now works for the university. He worked in the honors program and is now in a fundraising position for the university. His name's Aaron Von Qualen. And he decided to stay here, but I had good fortune to work with Aaron. And then the other person that I heard from just today, her name is Natalie Richardson. And I met Natalie in my first, really the first few months of being here as a vice president. And she was a transfer student. She was at a community college, and she'd been their student trustee on their board of one of the elected officials in Springfield, and was looking for a place to transfer. And I happened to know the person that she was working for in that place in Springfield, and he suggested that Natalie come up to Illinois State, and he said, I know a fellow up there by the name of Larry Dietz, and I think you ought to go see him and talk to him about, transfer possibilities and what you might major in and so on and so forth. And out of that conversation, Natalie transferred, and she became very involved in student organizations. She was one of the first people that signed up for the ISULeads program. She graduated from here with terrific academic achievements. She became very involved as a student and left here, moved to Nashville, Tennessee, and started a job at Vanderbilt University. Worked for them for a while, finished a master's degree, and she's now in Fort Worth, Texas, and with her fiance. And today she's interviewing for a job in student affairs at Texas Christian University, where the vice president for student affairs got her PhD from Illinois State, and where the president of that institution is a fellow by the name of Vic Buschini, who was the president of Illinois State University before Al Bowman became the president of Illinois State. So it's a small world, small circle, but it's an important one, and this network that you'll find will be very helpful to you if you nurture it and work on it and get to know each other, will be something that'll be with you for perhaps the rest of your life. And so I've been invited to Natalie's wedding. She's going to get married on my birthday next May down in Fort Worth, and so I'm going to do my darndest to get down and be a part of that. But anyway, it's my pleasure to be here, and again, thanks for being a part of the ISULeads program. I don't know that I have any great words of wisdom. I have some words, but I'm not sure how wise some of them are. I think leadership is a very broad topic. Means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And I think the most important thing is that what does it really mean to you? And I've been a student of leadership myself most of my career. And the most books on any shelf in my office is the shelf that has all of my leadership books on that shelf. And a lot of people have done research on it. There's lots of philosophies about leadership. There's a lot of research that's been done on what makes leaders leaders. If you're interested in reading about some of those, some of my favorite authors in that area, Peter Drucker has done a lot of work in the area of leadership. A fellow by the name of Lee Bolman, B-O-L-M-A-N, Bolman and Deal, Terry Deal, D-E-A-L. They've written a lot of books about leadership, and one of the most inspiring that I read from Bowman and Deal was called Leading with Soul. And it's really well beyond the idea of the content of any kind of leadership program or strategy that you might follow. And it's really talking about passion, and where does that come from? And how do you lead with soul? How do people see that you're passionate about something and that they will get on board with whatever you'd like to have them get on board with, and how do you follow through on that? I had the good fortune of actually working with Lee Bowman 2 institutions ago at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and got to know he and his wife really quite well, and his wife was a noted professor in their College of Education. And Lee comes at the topic a little bit differently with his passion and soul kind of idea. Lots of other people have written on the topic. I did bring a couple of books along today that it looks like that I only read books that are blue on leadership. These two just happen to be blue. One is called The 8 Mandates of Personal Leadership. It's got some workshop kind of activity in here that you can do on your own. It asks you to examine some of your own values and some of your own perspectives on leadership. And Eric Sacchetti is the author of this, so I'd commend it to you. The other one is another friend of mine. It sounds like I'm name dropping. I apologize for that, but I do know this guy. His name is Bill Grace. And Bill and I were in graduate school many years ago, and this book is called Sharing the Rock, Shaping Our Future Through Leadership for the Common Good. And I grew up on a farm in the southern part of the state, so pardon this farm analogy, but how many people grew up on a farm? Anybody else in the crowd? Well, this probably won't go over with a hoot then, but I'm still going to tell you the analogy. I always told folks that there were a lot of us that were in graduate school together, and we got along great, and we did pretty well in the coursework and all that kind of stuff. Bill was really a philosopher. I always said, here's the farm analogy, that he plowed the furrow a little bit deeper than all the rest of us. And that probably doesn't mean diddle to any of you, other than if you've ever seen somebody plow a field. The furrow is the row that you drop the wheel in, and the plow comes along behind that and turns the ground over. So Bill was always a little deeper, a little more heavy, if you will, than some of the rest of us were. And I don't want you to go on away thinking, well, this Dietz guy is kind of a shallow fellow, because I don't think that I am. But Bill really led a lot of us in our thought processes, not about what are you doing, and are you doing things the most effectively and efficiently that you can do that, but why are you doing what you're doing? And that's a real basic question of any leader. I talk to students quite a bit, and I really enjoy this kind of interaction, and I hope there will be some interaction after I finish some of my storytelling, if you will. But that whole part about why are you doing what you're doing is a big deal. I tell students that leadership to me is very simple. It's a simple description of a very complex topic. To me, leadership is about stepping out, stepping up, and never stepping on. And the stepping out is about taking some responsibility, seeing something that you think that you can make better, that you have a passion for, because if it's just an intellectual thing, you won't have much staying power with that, which gets into the values, and I'm going to talk about values here in a few minutes. But the stepping out is being willing to take a risk. You don't have to be the brightest person in the room. You don't have to be the strongest. You don't have to be the most intelligent, on and on and on. But you have to be willing to find something that you're willing to take a risk to say, I want to make a difference in this area, and I think I can contribute. So stepping out's a big deal. It's not a showy thing. It's just, though, being able to take a risk and say, I'm willing to provide some time, hopefully some talent to this. And then, as we say in the fundraising world, time, talent, and treasure. Treasure is something that usually comes later for students, but time and talent, there's always a good way to express that. So that's the stepping out. The stepping up is then perhaps learning more about the particular area that you're interested in learning about, and becoming more knowledgeable about how you might impact change in that particular area or a particular direction. And so I think that stepping up into a leadership role, usually you join something and you're part of a larger group. And then through that evolution, if you're willing to, again, risk a little bit more, the stepping up into leadership roles that's an important thing to do as well. So not only to be a part of the group, but be a leader in the group. And then I think sometimes people make a mistake by thinking, well, if I've stepped out and I've stepped up, there were people that opposed me or had a different idea, or I ran against for a particular office or something of that nature. And, I kind of want to eliminate that competition. So some folks have a tendency to want to step on and kind of extinguish whoever was the challenger. And that's never a good idea, because people also watch that. And I will mention as a personal story also that leadership is not always about getting your own way. Personal story. I finished master's and doctorate at Iowa State University. I was in the financial aid department for many, many years, and was working on my doctorate and about to finish that, and was the chair of a staff development committee for the entire Division of Student Affairs that comprised about 600 employees. And there were a number of us that were in the doctoral program and who were working either full-time or part-time in given departments. And a lot of us thought, maybe we'd like to explore something beyond the department that we're in to see if there's a leadership role for us a little broader than the department that we're in. So my group came together. We put together a job description for a position that was going to be half-time as an assistant to the vice president, so we could get a little broader view than the departmental level. So I was asked by my committee to advance that to the vice president. So I went in and met with him, and he said, I think it's a good idea. So it'll be a 1 year, kind of an internship, if you will, rotational thing. You'll be out of it, and that'll give you an exposure to all these other departments that are in this division that was called Student Affairs. And some may learn from that it helps them move into other jobs, larger amounts of responsibility, more departments, whatever it would be. But he said, here's the deal. He said, I don't want to select the person. I want your committee to select the person. So you'll go through an advertising process, and your group will interview and select the person to be in this role for the first time. I said, okay. So I went back and I thought about this a lot, and I finally decided that I'm going to be an applicant for that. And so I told my committee that I was going to be an applicant and I would forego my chair role of that, and they could choose whomever they wanted. And so about a half a dozen people applied for that job. And my own committee that I chaired picked my best friend, Jim Moore, to do that job. And I thought, what the heck? Am I not doing as good a job as I thought that I was doing? It was a real comeuppance, kind of feeling that I got. And Jim has just retired last year. He was a vice president at 3 or 4 different institutions across the country. Had a very different style than I do. We were dear friends to this very day. But it was a new program, and Jim had the personality to introduce change a little less bumpily than I might have introduced some change. And frankly, he was the right choice at the time. But I was a pretty disappointed guy, thinking, well, I've kind of fought for this thing, and so maybe I ought to, should have been the first person. As it turned out, Jim did a great job. Initially, the departments were all freaked out that an assistant two might be a barrier between them and the vice president, who they would have been reporting to. Jim was able to navigate that very, very well. But I went back to my committee and I said, is this kind of a vote of no confidence in my being chair of the committee? And they were very candid and said, not at all. We want you to continue as chair. We think that's all fine. We just think Jim is a little better prepared to start this as a new program. Okay. So the thing that I learned out of that is that you don't run out of the room with your hair on fire if you don't get your way. Because more people watch when you sometimes don't get your way than whenever you do. Everybody wants to join a positive party. Who doesn't want to jump on a bandwagon when things are really good? But a lot of people will watch when you don't get your way. Another example, fast forward many years. So I came here in 2011 as a vice president for student affairs. I came here with the idea that I would retire working for a fellow that hired me, who was a very popular president. His name was Al Bowman. Got along very well with President Bowman, and he'd been here for almost 10 years, about 8 years at the time. And when I interviewed, I said, "How long are you going to be here?" And he said, "Longer than you." And I thought, all right, that's great. And about a year into that, he retired. And so I said, "Don't you remember our conversation? What's this about?" And he said, "Well, it's about my wanting to retire." He said, "You know, I was always told in this role that you'll know when it's time to get out of the role." And he said, "It's really nothing that anybody's done. It's just me." He said, I've finished most of the projects that I wanted to do here. And he said, "I just think it's my time." So I applied for the job. Two other vice presidents applied for the job at the same time as well. Those two other vice presidents had been here longer than I had. I hadn't been here but about a year. So as it turned out, I ended up getting a campus interview. I went to the airport interviews, and the feedback was really good. And I got a campus interview. As I would talk to people, they said, "You know, this is really terrific. I think you're really going to be able to do this." Great. And then the board selected another person. So I'd been on the campus, been very visible on the campus, and I thought, man, here we go again, you know? So I asked the board, I said, they said, "It's not about you." He said, "The person that was selected for two reasons, neither of which you can do anything about." He said, "We decided that we would go outside the university, because Dr. Bowman was hired from inside the university. He'd have been a professor and a provost, and so he was kind of inside. And frankly, I found that a bit ironic, because I had spent all of my career except for 1 year outside of the university. But when you join the university, all of a sudden you're viewed as an insider. So he said, we decided to go outside, and we decided to go with a sitting president. And you haven't done that job before. And I said, well, you know, I have to accept your decision, and I will. And I'll do my darndest to be the best vice president I know how to be for this new president, and I'll help him achieve his agenda. And but I said, well, I have to accept your decision. I don't have to agree with it, and I don't. But having said that, I'll bust my tail end to try to be the best VP I know how to be. So again, those are tough situations. I didn't get my way. Very public kind of thing. You know, this newspaper covered the whole deal. People were coming up and, oh, you know, this is great, and so on and so forth, and then you don't get your way. So how you react to that is also very, very important. So let me talk a little bit about values, and this is where my friend Bill Grace comes in and Sharing the Rock. It's a good, quick, and easy read, but there's a lot of thought-provoking information in his book. I've seen Bill work with large groups of people. I've hired him at 2 different institutions to be a consultant and do some team building. And he would get a room maybe 2 or 3 times this size, full of people. And he said, you know, I think that we would be able to decide what our shared values are going to be very quickly. And the bottom line is that if we share our values, we can do about anything together. And values are kind of a personal issue, but I've seen him bring large groups of people together in about 2 hours with a very short list of shared values for people of different ages, different ethnicities, different genders, different religions, different everything. You say, well, how in the devil do you do that? Well, first of all, he plowed the furrow a little deeper, but it's kind of an interesting process. And the thing that he would do, and I'm not going to do it here, but I'll just tell you about it. The thing that he would do, he said, I want you to think about this, and he said, I don't want you talking to your neighbor. I just want you to sit and reflect and think about this. What are the things that you stand for? And doesn't have to be 35 or 40. It ought to be a handful. things that you stand for that really make a difference, that when push comes to shove, you would base all of your decisions on. And so you'd write those down. And so, and I did this with a group of deans and vice presidents at a previous institution. We all sat around like this, and we wrote those 5 things down. And so he would go to a board, and we'd start listing things. And he would end up with a list of probably 40 or 50 different words. Then we'd start talking as a group, well, how does this word relate to this word down here? Are those kind of similar? And can we lump those together? And pretty soon you do the clustering kind of thing. And pretty soon then, you've got a fairly short list of things that people really can't agree on, and they're pretty basic. And I remember vividly the power of some of that after we had written down our 4 or 5 things that we'd agreed to. There's power in standing up and telling people what you believe in. What are your values? Huge power in that. So he would say, what I'd like everybody to do is to stand up, and we wouldn't do this within groups of hundreds, but he'd do it in smaller groups. Stand up, say your name, I'm Larry Dietz, and I stand for, and then you'd list the things. And then you'd listen to everybody around the room, list their things that they stand for. But you're physically standing up and you say, I stand for these things. And you don't have to agree, but pretty soon it all begins to cluster, and what comes out of that is a community that has shared values. So if you have shared values, then all the other things about strategic planning that you hear about, all those things really are secondary to what do you stand for. And that was one of the things that intrigued me and when I came to Illinois State University in the first place. We have 5 values. Strategic plan says we have 5 values. Scholarly achievement for the faculty. We want the faculty to be at the top of their game. And scholarly achievement for you, for the students. We want you to be at the top of your game. We want you to finish your degrees. That's why you came here. Close isn't good enough. We want you to finish your degrees. So scholarly achievement was the first one. The second one is diversity. And that's, we're working on those values now. I'll talk more about that later if you have a question about that. Civic engagement. We want you to be involved outside of the university and serving people other than yourself, kind of stepping out, if you will, stepping up. 4th value is individualized attention. And initially, I wasn't sure what that meant. I can come back to that in a little bit, too. I think that is one of the things that makes this university stand out pretty dramatically. And the 5th one is integrity, all undergirded by integrity. So we tell people what we stand for, what we're going to do. We do that. And then we build an evaluation loop that says, well, can we improve all of this? So you've got a continuous loop around values. Then all the other strategies about, well, how many students do we want? Of what quality? What kind of curricula should we have? How much money do we have and how much more do we need? All of those things, though they're important, but not nearly as important the thing that shapes a community, and the thing that shapes a community ultimately are shared values. So when you get that back to the leadership, how does the leadership wrap into all of this? To me, it wraps in very, very closely. It's hard to be a leader of an organization that you don't believe in, that you don't believe that they have the same kind of values that you have. So getting the congruence of yourself and the organization that you're a part of is really, really important. A lot of presidents fail because those 2 things are not congruent. And so if you can get the congruence of that, you're much more likely to be successful. So it gets well beyond, well, what are the tasks at hand that I need to do, and how do I lead? How do I supervise people? How do I manage a budget? All those kinds of things. Those are tasks. But if you can get to the leadership part through values, then you've really got it not only in your head, but you got it in your heart. And that to me is really the essence of real leadership, because people can see that, you can see that, whether or not people care about you, which gets back to the value of individualized attention. I met with an alum and her daughter's friend right before I came over here. The alum's daughter and her daughter's friend were both interested in coming here, perhaps this next fall. So I said, are you looking at other places? Oh yeah, we're looking, and rattled off a half a dozen places. And I said, all those are fine institutions. There's nothing wrong with any of those. But I went back to the values, and I said, I think one of the things that'll stand out here is this individualized attention piece. We care about each student. If you go up to your faculty member, and if you have done this and it hasn't worked, please talk to me offline about this. I'd rather you not bring this up in the group. But bottom line, what my experience has been is that when students go up to faculty, that you don't get the word that, well, if you have a question about, my presentation today, here are my office hours, I'll give you 5 minutes 3 weeks from Tuesday. My sense is that you don't hear that. My other sense is that generally you don't get a graduate assistant. You get the faculty member. And some large lectures that might be a little bit different, but we don't have a ton of those. So the faculty member cares about you. The staff member cares about you. They want you to succeed. And I've often said, at this university, we don't have a bell curve of achievement. Bell curve sometimes of people, that's kind of an old style, but some folks used to grade on a bell curve. Meaning that there are people at this tail end of the bell curve that if you just threw a book in the room and you didn't do anything else, they're bright enough, they're going to gather everything that you would test on and they'll achieve. At the other end of the tail, that there would be folks that just probably aren't going to make it. And most of the folks are kind of in the middle. They're B students, C students, maybe some D students, but both tail ends of that, they're A's and F students. So we don't have this is not a bell curve institution. This is an everybody can achieve institution. And it doesn't mean that we don't struggle, but everybody can achieve here. And to me, that's about the individualized attention piece that I've worked at several other institutions in several other states, and I haven't felt that esprit de corps the same way that I felt it here. It's much stronger here. So it's easy for me to stand in front of this alum and her daughter's friend and talk about that. And I said, and I'm not tooting my own horn, but I said, how many presidents have you met at those other institutions? Well, none. I said, well, that doesn't surprise me. And it's not me, again, tooting my horn. It's me living out the individualized attention that I expect of everybody else. So if I expect that of staff, I expect that of faculty, and we hire to that value, then I expect that of myself. I said, now, frankly, this is about the most, other than this conversation here, this is one of the most fun things I'll do all day, My other challenges are go back and try to balance the budget and do a bunch of policy stuff. Well, that's not nearly as much fun as this human interaction that we have going, that we can talk to each other. And so it's not a chore by any stretch, but it's really a living out of the values. So the values piece, the leadership piece are very, very important. A lot of folks have that have heard me speak before, know that I talk about how important planning is, though, also. And it's very, very important to plan your work and then work your plan. Otherwise, you can waste a lot of time being all over the place. And that's where the strategic planning piece comes in. And it really does require some leadership to keep the group together around the common values and what that plan will look like. And we're undergoing a process right now that is reviewing our strategic plan. It's been called Educating Illinois. And the new one would probably be called something else. But it's going to be a reiteration and a review and a little bit of a reform in that old Educating Illinois. I think the title is way too narrow, because I had somebody ask me once, are you educating all of Illinois? And I said, well, yes, and we're educating some folks from Indiana and Missouri and California and India and China, and so I think the title might be a little narrow for us, so we're going outside of that, but that's going to be our plan. And we don't have to accomplish everything in that plan because it's a pretty ambitious plan. We're going to try, but the thing that it requires us to do is to focus on what's in the plan. We ought not to be doing a bunch of stuff out here. And you can spend a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of effort doing stuff that you think, well, that sounds interesting. Well, there's a zillion things that sound interesting at a university. But if it's not in your plan, don't spend a lot of time on that until it gets to the point where you think it's important enough to work into the next plan. And a couple of things that we're doing right now around the curriculum, we just implemented a cybersecurity program here. First cohort have the first undergraduate program in the state in cybersecurity. We're looking into engineering right now. So that's going to be another part of the plan. That was outside of the plan earlier, but now I think it's probably going to be a part of the plan. And it's going to be broader than that. It's going to be about refreshing the curriculum, and the faculty are really the group that'll do that. So let me stop there for a moment and see if you have any questions, and maybe we can kind of start more of a dialogue back and forth. I was very fortunate to have been involved with 2 graduate programs that had national reputations. And out of that, and I would encourage that within this group as well. It can happen really in any group. I was fortunate to be able to be in 2 different graduate programs at 2 institutions that had a lot of really fine people in that. There was a commonality, is that we were all going through the same trials and tribulations that the coursework presents to you and the challenges, and that the lifestyle presents to you. And so out of that became a pretty close-knit group. And the one connection, there was probably about 20 of us at any one time that were different stages of my doctorate. And so we had a commitment to each other, which gets back to shared values. We had a commitment to each other because there were very few times that everybody would be taking their prelims at one time or the comprehensives. So there was kind of a mixed schedule. So the idea is that if you were the one up, taking your prelims or your comprehensives, there was somebody ahead of you that would help you out, that you could run some ideas by, and you could form that kind of a network and a relationship. By the same token, when it was your time and you'd already done that, your commitment was to the person behind you. And I remember vividly, the person behind me was doing her work, and I was in Germany doing some work, and I called her every night from Germany. And I forget what time that was in Germany, but nevertheless, every night. Well, how'd you do today? How'd it go? What'd you think? What do you got tomorrow? And so that network can provide you terrific amounts of support when you have challenging times. And frankly, it's a lot of fun whenever they aren't so challenging and you're just celebrating an accomplishment. But that group, that network of folks has been with me throughout my entire career. Jim Moore, the fellow that I mentioned earlier in my comments, I've never made a major career move without consulting with Jim. And my major professor is the same kind of person. He retired 2 years ago after 50 years of teaching, and the same is true of him. He still is interested and believes in me, and I run that by him. And the other person is still teaching at the University of North Dakota. And so it wasn't all 20, but any of those 20 that I could call up right now and say, I need something, and they'd do it, just like that, because they know I'd do it for them as well. So network is huge. You can run professional ideas by. They pick you up when you're down. They celebrate with you when things are good, and it's fun. The story I mentioned about Natalie Richardson, had I not been involved professionally, I wouldn't have known who the Vice President for Student Affairs was at TCU. I wouldn't have known the President at TCU. So when I got a text from her saying, I'm down here interviewing, and Kathy says hello, the Vice President texts back and said, good luck in the interview, and tell Kathy hello. Now, whether or not that did her any good today at all, I don't know, but it's a familiarity kind of thing. It gets back to the old, You probably don't remember this, but there was a TV show, Cheers, and it's a kind of a place where you go where everybody knows your name was the deal. And so who doesn't want a Cheers group kind of thing? And that can provide that, and it can be terrifically stimulating intellectually, because golly, we would sit around now and then, have great conversations, and thought many times we'd solved all the problems of the world, you know. But it can help professionally, and on a personal level, it forms some very enriching and deep relationships. So I think it's huge, and you can do a lot of that through professional associations as well. So get active in you know, your professional associations, get to know people in other places. Because if you kind of stay in the higher ed mix, or whatever mix you decide to get involved and get to know the folks, and it's just a terrific asset to have. So, thanks for the question. Well, there's several ways I would say of promoting ISU, and it doesn't have to be, you know, a big expansive programs that you decided to. It can be as simple as telling your neighbor about your own story, and hopefully it's a positive one. If it's a negative one, then I don't know, you know. But hopefully it's a positive one, and just tell the story. And it can start really with the person next door, the neighbor down the street, the person that you met at a social event, whatever. That vibe, if you will, is really pretty important. So just on a very small level, but each of those stories begin to bond together, and it becomes one huge story, and becomes one big brand, if you will, about positive experiences that folks have had. Other ways about promoting in the community, there's lots of alumni activities that you can be involved with and meet other folks. If you're interested in the governmental relations stuff, student government is involved in spreading the word to our elected officials. That, to me, frankly, is one of our biggest challenges right now at the state level and at the national level. Higher education is not valued very much in the state of Illinois right now, and isn't valued very much at the national level. And I would say that there isn't a lot of leadership that's going on in there either. Leadership is about moving the agenda. Simply put. It's not about saying, well, here's my line in the sand, and if I don't get this, then I'm going to take my ball and go home. That's not leadership. I do things, not every day. I don't ever do anything that's illegal and unethical, but there are times that I do things that I thought my idea was better than this, but this one's got a lot more people behind it, so what's the end goal? If the end goal is moving the agenda, and it always is in leadership, then fine. Then give in some. Leadership is about persuasion, informing, cajoling, compromising, collaborating, all those kinds of things that we don't see a lot of, unfortunately, right now in politics. We see a lot of things divided along party lines, and that's it. And that's unfortunate. I'm an optimist about that, though, and that we're resilient as a society. And my sense is that the pendulum has swung a little bit. The pendulum will swing back. And so, I'm pretty optimistic about all that. But I think part of that is kind of finding what you're most comfortable with. And we can talk, offline about that more if you have, other ideas. So, great question. I think part of that is self-awareness. You've already expressed this in front of the group, that you know something about yourself that maybe you'd like to change a little bit, and it sounds like you are. A big part of leadership, in my estimation, I used to think that people that were presidents of universities, my gosh, they had to be the brightest in their class, and they had to be the most innovative in their group, and just brilliant folks that had terrific charisma, and some are, but what I found is that what happens when you move into these roles is that your peer group changes. I learn a ton from other presidents, and you generally can't learn as much if you're talking all the time. So listening is a huge deal. And matter of fact, the more you talk sometimes, the less credibility you have. And we have one president, I won't mention who this is, but I'm the convener of the university presidents across the state of Illinois legislatively. And we have one president who has an opinion about everything, and you can just count on it. And so, frankly, we don't have time for this one person to give us the opinion about every topic. So what's happened is that her credibility has gone down a bit because people don't have the time. So when you listen more and you learn some things, when you do speak, your credibility generally goes up. Because, and structurally, to try to get folks more involved in conversations, if you're the convener or you're the committee chair or whatever, you can really structure that a bit to say, you know, Bob, thanks for your opinion. I know that you want to, you know, talk more about this, but Wanda here hasn't spoken. So I want to give time to those people who haven't had an opportunity to speak up. Do any of you want to say anything? So you're not necessarily putting Wanda on the spot by herself, but you're allowing some time, and give it time. Pause and see what happens. If Wanda doesn't want to say anything, you know, don't force her. She may not have anything she wants to contribute. But you can sometimes structurally help that. And then if nobody wants to say anything and Bob wants to talk more, you can acknowledge that. But I think a lot of it is a self-awareness and trying to work in plenty of time for reflection and listening. And silence is not a bad thing. That was really the power of Bill Grace's thing. You know, what do you stand for? Don't talk to anybody else. Don't get on your cell phone. Just sit and think. We're all very busy. Lots of outside stimulations. Take time to sit and think. Why am I doing this? Should I spend my time? Those kinds of things. If it's about curriculum, there are a lot of trends that you can look at, and you look at the needs of the state. You know, what does the state need? The reason that we're pursuing engineering right now, there's a lot of universities that offer engineering degrees, but there's not enough engineers graduating from all of these programs to meet the needs of the folks that are hiring engineers in the state of Illinois. So there's a need there, and so that's one of the ways to begin to address it. What's the need? And then the second thing on curricular issues is that the kiss of death for an idea like that would be for me to tell the faculty what they ought to be doing. I'm a faculty member as well, and if you ask folks, what do you think? You think it's a good idea, would you look into it? Where do you think we could go with this? Because it's really their disciplines, it's not mine. And so I ask a bunch of folks who are engineers who teach here. And we don't have an engineering program, most of our ABET accredited engineers are teaching in physics. And so I asked some of those faculty members, I said, do you think we could develop an engineering program? And what would we need? What are we teaching now, and what would we need? And they've been pretty aggressive about, yeah, I think we could offer several things. And they've been, I said, I'll send you to other campuses so we can explore this a little bit. But it would add a new dimension to the university that I think would be a very, it would help fill a need, and I think it would be something that would raise the visibility of the university. But you let the folks do their job, and you ask them to do things, and you praise them, and you trust the folks that you've asked to do the things. So that's part of it.
All right. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you.